represents an ecosystem whereby we're adding value within an internal environment, which is contained by a broader external environment. And an internal environment might be the partnerships that you're working in, but the external environment might be the broader market or the broader geography that you're in. And so this graphic is intended to visualize how the new parts of the PMBOK guide are all going to come together in a way that's coherent and in a way that makes sense. Now that we've said that, here's the million-dollar question. WTF? Like, what? What do you mean? What motivated this anyway? Well, it turns out that right after the 6th edition was released back in 2017, right around that time, the PMI volunteer leaders came together and crafted a strategic plan that was starting to recognize there are some patterns in the world of work, in industry, in government, in nonprofits, all universally, which is change is out of control. And we're not going to put the genie back in the box. The pace of change that we have today is the fastest and most disruptive we've ever had in human history. It's one of the key differences between highly effective leadership today and highly effective leadership 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, is that what you knew 10 years ago, much of it is obsolete. Anybody here have a DVD collection, like a Blu-ray collection? Yeah, obsolete. Oh no. Everybody's streaming their stuff. Change has changed. Also, competition. I mean, we just heard a great talk about how Indiana is asserting itself as a new competitive threat to the data center industry. Look out, Illinois. It's coming. So we, as professionals, represent new competitive threat, and we're also having to deal with competitive threat. And as a result, our organizations are being forced to kind of pivot and change. They're looking at us. They're looking at us. Aren't you the change masters? Don't you get projects done? Don't you take current state and future state? So help me deal with all this change. And so that meant that there is a material impact on the jobs that we do as leaders, as project leaders. And a pattern started emerging around a bigger emphasis on leadership and strategy, a more pronounced emphasis on how work itself is changing its shape. I mean, let's be honest, you're going to be dealing with a hybrid workforce indefinitely. It's not just during the pandemic and not just during reentry, but there's going to be a lot of people that just aren't ever going to go back to the office. And we're going to have to be the ones to help figure out how to navigate all that. And then functional roles and responsibilities are changing too. It used to be my job is my job. I don't do Windows. Well, you're going to have to get a little bit more like a ninja and start being able to add value in places you didn't anticipate. And so this was starting to percolate at the most senior levels of the Project Management Institute's volunteer leaders. If you guys know, all of your chapter presidents are volunteers. And they're also project practitioners themselves, just like the board of the global organization itself as well. So is it just them that are feeling this? Is it just them that are seeing this? So they went out and they asked some people. And it turns out we all agree. This is the new normal. This is happening. So the PMI, they ran several workshops across the globe and asked the questions, are you seeing this too? And if you're seeing this, what advice, I love this question, what advice would you give your younger self starting out in the profession? And does that advice stand the test of time even today? So when you start hearing seasoned project leaders saying, you know, I would have spent less time memorizing techniques and more time listening to my team, because I alienate them more often in my younger career, and I learned that the hard way. So those kinds of lessons started to get collected, and then they were compiled, and we took a stab at drafting a set of those principles and domains and ideas and ran them by by 70 well-established, well-respected experts who gave some pretty critical feedback, who then invited us to send it out to a public exposure draft where over 500 other people gave their 2 cents. And started to see an emerging pattern, which is the PMBOK guide used to be, let's be honest, fairly prescriptive. Like if you weren't doing, my slides vanish? There we go. If we weren't doing the human resources management processes in the right order, you kind of felt like something was missing. And now what we're learning is that, let's just get to the bottom basics of what effective project leadership and organization looks like. Also, instead of the inputs, outputs, tools, and techniques that we've been using for years and years and years, people started saying we need to be a little bit more focused on the interactions and interdependent areas of work that we do, focusing less on project outputs and more on project outcomes. Also, instead of being most projects most of the time as the focus of the document and the standard, there is a challenge to expand the conversation to any project at all. And instead of it just being targeted to project managers who have an official title of project manager, we're discovering that project management is no longer a solo endeavor. It takes a village. It takes a team. And we need our project management disciplines and competencies and best practices to be interesting to more people, to everyone on the team, everyone in leadership. One of the reasons why it's been so hard to get leaders on board with the value of project management and the value that we offer is because, all of the stuff that we write, it's really for us. What if we completely reframed our own conversation? And so this infographic is actually available on the PMI.org website. If you go take a look at the current standards projects, it's right there as a really good downloadable resource to visualize the differences. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, wait, all right, Jesse, we heard your introduction. You're an Agile guy. And all this talk about dispensing with formal, reliable, repeatable processes and going to some foo-foo principles. You know what this sounds like? All this talk of change sounds like a bunch of Agile. Isn't this what this is all about? And the answer is no. This is bigger. This is much bigger. If you take a look at the 2 core products, the most important products that PMI offers right now in the world of Agile, the Disciplined Agile Toolkit and the Agile Practice Guide. The Disciplined Agile Toolkit, which comes with a variety of training programs and certification programs, is a flexible toolkit. It's exactly that, where it gives you guidance on a specific focused set of techniques for a certain set of projects. And both Disciplined Agile and the Agile Practice Guide will tell you, you don't want to use Agile for everything. You're only going to use it in certain situations. Also, the Disciplined Agile and the Agile Practice Guide did not go through the ANSI process. They have not been subjected to the kind of rigor that the PMBOK guide goes through, which isn't to say that they're artificially generated. The Agile Practice Guide not only went through a formal formal guide standards process, it was also jointly developed with the Agile Alliance. And Disciplined Agile has been a broad community conversation for the last 10 years. So it's not like those things are made up. It's just a different level of rigor that we bring to the PMBOK guide. Oh, and instead of just using Agile techniques, we're covering in the PMBOK guide a broad and growing library of methods, models, and artifacts. In fact, it's so big, it no longer fits in a print document. There's a completely new membership-only website called PMI Standards Plus, where you can go and learn any technique in any situation for any special, bizarre kind of project you're working on in a particular market or sector. And that digital library is growing and expanding, not just with write-ups of different techniques, but also blogs and articles and white papers to help us kind of wrap our heads around the practice. So this is not just an agile thing. This is absolutely a broader seismic shift of the entire world of work. And so the question then becomes, all right, fair enough. Okay, Jesse. So how do I use this? You're telling me what the changes are going to look like. Okay. You're telling me why this is important. Fair enough. So what do I do? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Let's pick one arena, one domain, one area where we add value. And that's navigating uncertainty. If nothing ever went wrong on a project, we would not be needed. The whole reason we are hired is to deal with uncertainty, arguably. Arguably, the reason we're hired is to take a project from this nebulous concept into reality, despite reality. So how do we do that? Well, I mean, we all know our risk register. Okay, got that. How about a change control process? Okay, got that. So this is not a bizarre concept to us. It's actually something that we're pretty good at, because this thing is more and more to our reality. If you haven't heard of the acronym VUCA, it's a hot term these days in leadership circles to describe all of the ick, all of the stuff that's going on. And all of the ick and the stuff and the annoyances, everything that annoys me as a project manager when I'm trying to get work done is either volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity, or complexity. That's what gets me agitated the most is, I have a plan. I have a path forward, and then boom, global pandemic, boom, domestic recession, boom, social unrest. And you expect the exact same thing to get done? What? Or how about this? How about we have potentially two different directions to go depending on what the stakeholders decide, but they're not deciding and they're taking forever. And so we don't have clarity on exactly which of these options are going to materialize. We kind of know what might happen, but and then what if we don't even know that? What if, I would like your requirements, please. No, I don't have any. Then how am I supposed to know what to do? Whatever your recommendation. But then you're going to be unhappy if you don't like it. Yeah, that's why I'm the boss. Ambiguity is now part of the job, as well as complexity. So, okay, let's say we do get all the data. Let's say it is pinned down. It's a big ball of spaghetti. It's a mess. You want how many vendors are involved in this? You want how many government agencies are involved in this project? You want how many different roles and descriptions and stakeholders? My stakeholder inventory is out of control. So this is the blah, the ick. And so when you talk about navigating uncertainty, this might be kind of the stuff that we're having to deal with. Well, in the guide, the current draft of the guide, there's actually a checklist that tells you whether or not you're addressing it effectively. And this checklist here is asking you, hey, when it comes to dealing with uncertainty, you're doing a pretty good job if you're aware of all the things going on. If you have awareness, are you looking at all the different things that are going on, probing and exploring what flavors of uncertainty are revealing themselves, anticipating threats and opportunities, capturing those opportunities, and preserving some options, contingencies, or reserves. If you're doing those things, you can go to bed at night doing, okay, I'm doing what I can. I'm fulfilling my professional obligation to navigate uncertainty as much as we can. A key example of that is the PMBOK guide itself. So the first three of these here are the three recent editions of the PMBOK guide from 2009, 13, and 2017. You see a pattern? Getting bigger and bigger. And when the 7th edition project was launched, was talking to the chair, Cindy. She was telling us that there are some hard conversations going on. Like, are we looking at a document now, the 7th edition, that's going to be 1,000 pages long? And so that's the question. With all of the changes going on in the world, you know what, that strategic plan that we just saw? Yeah. Hey, how about those workshops that the other volunteers held? They're telling us that the world is fundamentally changing. And you know what? Print might not be the right format anymore. We might need to go to a kind of a hybrid format where there is a formal document that goes through a traditional formal standards process, but then also some kind of a digital supplement. And while we're at it, those formal processes themselves, the framework, the flexible framework the PMBOK guide has always offered, it feels like it's not enough anymore. It feels like we need to start talking about a different kind of conversation. And so all of these things started kind of adding up to a complete shift in the 7th edition project itself, even after it was chartered. And so the 7th edition project team was like running around like, oh my gosh, we have to navigate some uncertainty now. We just got hit with some volatility. And so this is kind of the conversation that started happening is, well, all right. The toolkit, which the PMBOK guide is famous for, is what we use to do the job. Maybe you like using your your Moscow prioritization or your Monte Carlo simulation. Those are tools. We use those to get the job done. How you use those tools, depending on a certain environment, depending on a certain situation, is really influenced by your belief system. It's really influenced by your experiences. And so one person might use Monte Carlo simulation a different way based on their experiences than another person. And all of that adds up to adding value to your sponsors and to your leaders that hire you in the first place. So you're going to add value in specific scenarios and arenas and situations. And that all of that adds up. And so if that's the conversation that's happening and we go back to our scenario, well, how do I use all that? Jesse, tell me. Well, okay, 4 steps. Step 1, assess. Assess the situation, the project you're working on. When you're talking about uncertainty, what kind of uncertainty are you dealing with? And there are other domains too. There's also dealing with teams, dealing with stakeholders, dealing with metrics. But for this one, when it comes to dealing with uncertainty, let's unpack it a little bit. And so as a team, what we did is we borrowed that VUCA acronym as a way to filter out what kind of messiness and ick are we dealing with? Are we dealing with volatility, a fundamental seismic shift in the charter and in the plan and everything is going? Or is it that things are relatively stable, they're just ambiguous? And we haven't unpacked it yet. Is it vague? Or maybe it's complex. And by complex, there's different flavors of complexity. Maybe the fact is that we just do have a really big vendor ecosystem that we have to deal with. And that's its own complexity. But then it gets compounded when you ask all those vendors their opinions. And based on their frame of reference, they add another layer of complexity because everybody sees things differently. Never mind all of the policies and the procedures and the bureaucracies and the processes. And if any of those things have any material impact on the project, it's now, all of a sudden, it's now a risk. It's either a threat, opportunity. A risk is simply a potential event that has some material impact on the project, either positive or negative. So once we do that, we can kind of get a sense of what's next for us. And as I mentioned, when it came to that PMBOK guide project, that shift from the old way to a different way was a fundamentally volatile kind of uncertainty. And then there was COVID itself. We had to kind of adapt to that as well. Like, okay, we had our great kickoff meeting in Philadelphia, but now how are we gonna do our document writing workshops? Ugh. And let's be honest, all of this change is going to represent a fundamental risk to the entire profession of project management. I mean, there's going to be a potentially negative impact to trainers who teach this stuff, who now are going to be asked to teach a different kind of way. But there's also huge amounts of opportunity to start bringing in more people into the profession, to start including more leaders into the conversation about project management. So we had to really start kind of identifying and being honest with the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty with this that has a material impact. Step 2. So this is step 1. Assess the situation. Step 2, what domain are you in? Step 2, once you know the domain you're in and where you're trying to add value, consult the core principles. And with those core principles, they're going to tell you how you might go about adding value in that area. Well, it turns out there are 2 of the draft principles that directly relate to uncertainty. The first one, on the left, embrace adaptability and resilience. Be able to respond to changing conditions, absorb impacts, and recover quickly from setbacks. And then principle, the other one, 3.12, of course, subject to change, is enable change to achieve the future state. And that's like doing structured approaches to change, like formal change, organizational change management, or understanding external, internal influences, or engaging stakeholders to make sure they're on board with it. And if you look at these 2 principles, what you see here is change from 2 different vectors. On the one hand, the principle is we as project facilitators, leaders, or practitioners need to handle the changes that are inbound, headed in our direction, the changes that we experience. This is the stuff that we're annoyed about, the stuff that we're frustrated about because I had a plan and now I got to go through this change control process, which is an act of Congress. And so whenever it's a happy hour like this at our chapter meetings, we all like, oh, this just sucks. Yeah, it totally sucks. But then look about the other side. How about the change that we are injecting on other people? Sometimes we forget that we're doing some of that to them, that they're doing to us. And we need to be thoughtful about the changes we're injecting with our projects. So these 2 principles are reminding us that when it comes to inbound change, yeah, okay, you have 5 minutes to grieve. You have 5 minutes to shout at the sky and then go back to embracing adaptability and resilience. And then when it comes to injecting change, we need to be mindful that there's some structured approaches, but then there's also the human element with stakeholders and influencers. You're wondering what those green circles are? Those were the parts of the principles that related to the product, the PMBOK guide project itself. We had to respond to those changing conditions, like I mentioned, with going virtual for in shutdown, lockdown, quarantine, and so the challenge was not just virtual, not virtual, but the challenge was when you can't fly everybody to the same location, you got to support them in 24 different time zones. You know, we had people dialing in from the South Pacific, China, Europe, and then US. And of course, there's California, never mind, like North America being easy. So there was adapted to those changing conditions. And then there were some setbacks. There were real setbacks when we started getting some critical feedback from people who said, this is nonsense. This doesn't make this is not by in any way a definition of a standard of any kind based on how I define standards. And we had to ask honest questions. Like, do we need to rewrite this section from scratch? And speaking of those stakeholders who themselves are going through their own change experience process, the expert reviewers that we engaged, we had to find a way to engage people like this very webinar, this very conversation that we're having right now is part of an aggressive change or an aggressive communication strategy to bring you guys in on this conversation before it happens. So the 7th edition is still in process. It's still undergoing some formal reviews. And you guys are getting a head start. There are other project managers out there who haven't heard this, who haven't read the news and haven't gotten wind of it yet, which is why we're going on the campaign trail to let people know. So that's how we, as the project team behind the PMBOK guide, we're trying to practice what we preach here by engaging these principles. Step three now is Go do the WIKE. Find the tools, the meat and potatoes, the methods, models, and artifacts that are going to get the job done. We now know the domain we're operating in. We now know what principles are going to inform how we add value in that domain. Now it's time to start picking and choosing which of those techniques are going to really make material impact. And this is where the PMI Standards Plus started coming in really handy, because we started talking to that project team and saying, hey, what goodies are you going to put in there so that we understand what we should include potentially in the PMBOK guide publication itself versus maybe leaving online for later discovery and discussion. And again, in our case, the PMBOK guide project team itself, the assumptions log was a huge tool that we kept reviewing over and over and over again. When you talk about uncertainty, it's all assumptions, isn't it? It's not just risks about having a material impact, but once you have identified some of those risks and maybe done a qualitative, quantitative analysis on them, let's make some assumptions about how we navigate through that. And it was a hugely helpful tool, and we reviewed it regularly. Did that happen? No. Okay. All right. Could it still happen? Is this still the right choice, the right assumption to make? Well, let's talk about it. And then step 4. So step 1, where are we playing? What domain? Step 2, what principles inform how we might do that? Step 3, what tools in the PMBOK guide can we use, or maybe over in Standards Plus can we use? Step 4, how are we doing? Check the results. Go back to that domain in step 1 and take a look and compare. Are we gaining a better awareness of all the different dependencies and interdependencies? Are we still exploring the environment for all of those risks and opportunities? Are we capturing some of those opportunities? Are we getting delivery done despite uncertainty? Because it's no longer an effective narrative to say, sorry, boss, we can't get any work done until all these things are figured out. Really? You know, some of those things are not going to be figured out until after we're done, right? Yes, but it's still a risk. Yeah. Okay. So good luck with that. That's our job. More and more leaders are expecting us to come up with the solutions to the unknowns. And this is your checklist to help you determine whether or not you're fulfilling your moral professional obligation with a degree of confidence. And for us, that assumptions log was hugely important about anticipating risks and setting context awareness. But what we came back and checked against is who are we not thinking of in that context awareness? Who are some other stakeholders that we need to engage? And we started realizing that we might need to start talking not just to the vendors, but maybe also to other volunteers and inviting them to the conversation as well. So that's the first case study where we talk about how could we use the PMBOK guide 7th edition stuff to help inform how the PMBOK guide project itself can be completed despite global pandemic, recession, social unrest, and fundamental seismic shift in how we talk about our profession. But what about something more tangible? What about something that you could identify with more explicitly? And so we're going to take this 4-step process, what we're calling an intentional approach, which, by the way, is not in the PMBOK guide itself. This is something that that we're introducing as an idea, a handy suggestion. And maybe this resonates with you, maybe it doesn't. But remember that tailoring guide that's included inside the PMBOK? Well, there's a couple of other ways that you can approach this too. So if you were to use this 4-step process, you could use it at an infrastructure project. So let's assess which of the areas are we concerned about when it comes to an infrastructure project where there might be some uncertainty of some kind. Well, when we unpack uncertainty, it's not so much that an infrastructure project is going to undergo tons of volatility as much as it is really complex. And it's not until you get into the details where all of the weeds and all of the scorpions start coming out, like political ambitions of different people involved in that infrastructure project in the city, or public resistance to it after the referendum passed the referendum a year ago. We get around to breaking ground, and then boom, here comes public resistance. Oh, and speaking of breaking ground, there's other developments happening at the same time. Whoa. So now we know the kind of ick that we're dealing with. It's not volatility, it's complexity. And then once we have that in play, we can go consult the core principles, which tell us, in this situation, you might really want to engage some stakeholders aggressively, and with maybe some kind of public workshops or some town hall meetings. And we also want to absorb and recover a little bit from all of those things. That's the principles are telling us, absorb and recover a little bit. Okay, absorb and recover. How? Well, what are some past learnings when we started tripping over some of this resistance and some of this complexity? How did we deal with it in the past? Let's plan on making that, on referencing those past learnings and approaches when we start discovering the inevitable complexity that's going to bite us. Then we get to some good old-fashioned methods, models, artifacts, tools, techniques, like the risk register, influence diagram. I'm a fan of influence heat map, stakeholder heat map, where I can color code the stakeholders based on their influence. Also, if there's a lot of questions about whether this development is going to impact another one, or whether we might use design set theory, which is, you know what, let's build 2 different prototypes, and we'll get to a particular major milestone. We'll decide which of these 2 prototypes we want to move forward with in the way of blueprints. So by the time we're ready to break ground, we will have already selected from a set of options, and then we commit. So that might be something worth considering. And then finally, it's time to check results, where we take a look and ask, now that we're further along in this project and we're starting to see some of that complexity emerge, do we have an awareness of those interdependencies, of that, of who is emerging as an important new stakeholder? How much of it are we able to anticipate? What could we do to anticipate more of those? And then the cycle continues. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is just another example of how we could use this 4-step process. We could use this 4-step process as a way to help us manage projects using the new ingredients that we're seeing in the PMBOK guide. These principles that inform different arenas or domains or areas of practice, where, yeah, we're going to be still using a lot of methods, models, and techniques. In fact, we're going to be using an entire database, an entire online database of these methods, models, and techniques in order to produce deliverables, artifacts, outputs that affect true value in those domains. That's what we wanted to share with you today. Give you a sneak peek of what's coming up and why it's important, how you would go about using it yourself. And now I think we've got an opportunity to open the floor to some questions for myself and for Marv.
Thank you for a wonderfully engaging presentation, providing us this sneak peek to the 7th edition coming up. If we can also have Marv back as well. Thank you and welcome back, Marv. We're going to go to the audience for some questions. As I peruse the first ones here, I'm going to start off with one for each of you. I mean, this is an amount of change, and I'm curious as to how to perceive that change myself, as our audience as well. If on a scale of 1 to 5, let me do it this way, where 1 is tweaking and 5 is revolutionary change, how much of a change is this in your mind and why? Jesse, you first, then Marv, you might have a different answer.
If it didn't come across during the last 45 minutes, I'm on record saying this is a 5 out of 5. Oh. This is, for my money, this is one of the most important moments in the history of project management. Marv?
Yeah, I was saying, what came to my mind is when we were just deep into shaping that content, we actually did a webinar and we said it's a revolution.
Wow. There
Because
too.
we realize it's a seismic change. I think for the better. I think Jesse's done a great job casting why this is going to be more useful on the job.
I appreciate that, Marv. Just one more note and we'll take the next question. I think it's also very important to say that this is not a change that the Project Management Institute is introducing. This is a change that we are reflecting. It's already happened in the market. All we're doing is telling the story of what's happened over the last couple of decades as far as the whole world of work being pulled out from underneath of us. So I think it's important to say this is not something that PMI is doing to you. It's something that's already happened to us. And now we're just catching up with the times and telling the story as it is.
Yeah, and I think what I'd add to that, Jesse, is, and you drew that point out at several points in your speech, but this doesn't invalidate content that's in the 6th. It just leaps and goes way further down the road. As Jesse said at the outset, you move from most projects to all projects. That's a fundamental shift. How are we going to do that?
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the entire 6th edition has already been uploaded into PMI Standards Plus. So all of that content is still usable.
Yeah, actually, and it's the very project I'm working on right now is mapping that. It's a massive effort to say, okay, we built all this content. Now, guess what? We have a new edition coming. So where does it fit in? And I just finished the first major pass of it. It fits. It's there.
Jesse, you just mentioned PMI Standards Plus. One of you, how much is the membership to that? Marv, maybe for you.
Yeah, that probably should be for me, although Jesse can answer. But it's a member benefit. So if you're a member, you have access, and you just go and register. You will have to register there, but it's single sign-on. So your PMI credentials will get you in. If you're not a member, there is a subscription model so you can subscribe monthly. That's fine, but members have it as a benefit.
Thanks for the question, Cynthia. Here's from Brett. When will the program management certification see impact from the new edition?
Well, I think
maybe for you again.
Yeah, certification exams, again, I'll say, are based on the exam content outline, not a book. Not our book, not anybody else's book. It's an exam content outline. Specifically says this is what you are going to be tested on. These are not questions. These are areas you're going to be see questions on, right? So then you go to look at, okay, where are the references that help me answer questions that are going to be asked? And that's where these come in. So a PMBOK guide and the program management standard definitely have no relationship. I don't think the PMBOK guide is even listed as a reference to the program standard. It certainly is to the PMP, and when the 7th comes out, it will be added to the reference list.
I've got to tell you, Jesse, in your presentation, the slide that took me away the most there was the one in which you went from 4th edition size to the 7th edition size. I mean, that's striking. I happen to have the 4th edition here. I asked for it electronically at the time, and my associate couldn't find it electronically, an electronic version, and didn't want to disappoint me. This is front and back copies of 4th edition. There's her note to me, as a matter of fact, too, which is intimidating, isn't it? And so I was quite, struck by the size. But I wanted to check something during that part of the presentation. I think you were kind of saying, well, maybe the format for this is not paper. Maybe it's electronic and paper. Is it really shrinking in size, or is it a bit of a head fake in which, well, the paper copy is going to shrink in size, but we're going to have all these electronic resources, and there's actually more?
So I'll weigh in on this, and I'll ask Marv to correct me if I'm wrong. But the answer is that the PMBOK guide itself is a formal publication. So when you go to Amazon and you get it on your Kindle, or you go to Barnes & Noble, or you get the print version, it's the same document, regardless of what, or you download the PDF from the member site when it comes out. It's a fixed document because it went through a formal standards process. It's all the extra stuff that didn't make it in that's going to be in Standards Plus. So that's the best of both worlds as far as I'm concerned, because now I've got a firm fixed publication that's been through an ANSI standard process and a community process. It's firm, it's fixed. But what's changing around us, around the world over the next few years, we're going to upload that into the website so that way you've got both to bank on. And I'm thinking, Marv, the current estimated page count is somewhere not 1,000 pages, but more like 250.
Yeah, 300? Or 300. There's extra material that goes into it. So I'm on record as saying 300 because then it will be less than that and people will be happy. Yeah, but to your point, Jesse, when you start to extract the tutorial pieces out, which change, how do I do this? How do I actually, use the risk register rather than having to go from how do you do risk register work in, say, a traditional predictive kind of environment, then start going incremental and hybrid and agile. They look different. And to cover all of that, we would have more than doubled the pages, right? So you lift that and you say, this is much more appropriate in digital. Leave it on a digital platform. We continue. When tomorrow we learn about there's another way to do it, add to it, right? So that's why we could get to 300 print pages and make it more useful and then say, oh yeah, online, yeah, you can still read the print part, but you have all tools, techniques, models, method, artifact, all that stuff is there.
You may have mentioned this already, not sure, but Dan's question here, when are we expecting 7th edition? Uh-oh, Jesse's laughing. We
are expecting it.
Oh, goodness.
We are planning, here's the line, we are planning a 2021 release, but I can't give you a date yet. And it's, Jesse's alluded to this, a very, very rigorous process for a standard.
Yeah. And so I saw some other chatter in the chat window. Whatever's on Amazon, don't believe it.
Oh,
Amazon says like available March 31st.
Yeah, they've changed that because obviously it won't be. But yeah, the vendors have to have a date, if you will. So they are guessing forward and they missed it because we didn't say specifically a date. We haven't set a date ever, because we don't know until the standards process finished.
Okay, maybe just came up this question. Maybe you're chatting a little bit about this. The extra stuff that did not make it into the guide. Could you clarify that a little bit, please?
Yeah. So Marv, I liked your example of so if you have a risk register for a traditional project, but in an agile world, you might call that a risk backlog. Same thing. Then, I'm not going to put that in a formal standard that's going to go static as soon as it's published. What I am going to do is I'm going to say, here's a technique you should consider in any scenario that might add value. If you want to talk about how to use a different kind of risk register in different environments, go online in Standards Plus. What's another example that comes to mind since you've been working with those guys?
Well, I think the other big one is things vary by industry segment. Can look very different. And, we have, for years, we've been asked more case studies because we can learn from what other people have gone through. Again, how do you print all of that? I can do a lot in digital format. So building out case studies to continue to build the depth of the resource. And then we could say, yeah, give me a case study in pharma, give me a case study in engineering, give me a case study in infrastructure, give me a case study, name it. So that's what we're building.
Great. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Marv, thanks for bringing Jesse along. He's been a great add to our program here. Gang, I hope you really thoroughly enjoyed yourself and you got something out of this to help you get from where you are now to where you want to be in your professional project management career. This has been terrific. We want the feedback from you. We're going to have a survey right there at the top. It says click here and provide feedback on the event, a call to action button. I think we're also going to have it in the chat window as well. Please don't leave here without spending, I think it's 30 seconds to be able to do that. And Jesse, we want to express our appreciation to you too. So we're going to give you these, well, we were going to give you these glasses, but I can't get them. Jesse, here it is, a certificate of appreciation for you too. And I forgot to mention this to Tom Dockich a little bit earlier, though. But the really special thing about this, it's got the 5 signatures of the 5 chapter presidents, and that's really tough to get. We had a guy on a bicycle travel the state to be able to visit each one of the 5 and get these signed off that way. So I hope you appreciate it. I have one similar to it. I taped it up over my diploma. Quite the conversation starter. Gang, thank you again for joining us. Thank you for choosing to spend St. Patrick's Day with all of us on here. And Jesse, we have programs coming up in each of the chapters that you can see down there. Don't forget the survey. Please, we'd love your feedback on that. And I thought a great way just to kind of close out, I'll conclude and say goodbye. And can we spin that video up again that we played, the message from all the presidents? We're going to let that take you out and take you home. Good night, everyone. Happy St. Patrick's Day. And here's that roundtable video.
Hello, welcome everyone to the All Indiana PMI President's Roundtable. We are so excited you can join us tonight for this great event, and we hope to have many more in the future. We're excited to bring this and have all of our volunteers help, giving back to PMI. So thank you everyone that's volunteered to help tonight. We know that it's going to be a great event.
And hi, I'm Dan Zeli, the president from PMI Calumet chapter up here in Northwest Indiana. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed our premier speaker, Tom Dockich from Digital Crossroad. And it was great learning about our public and private partnerships and starting the data center here in the state of Indiana. This collaboration here between the presidents is how we all came together on a single subject that matters to all of us in the state of Indiana. Learning about economic opportunity zones and tax incentives. It's a great way, and we hope that we can bring you more.
Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Mike Ruiz. I'm the president of PMI Northeast Indiana chapter, and I am thrilled to be a part of this presentation this evening with all of the PMI Indiana chapters. I think what's most exciting for me is that it's been a hard year for everyone, and this is an opportunity for all of us to get together and see one another and see something that's important to residents from the state of Indiana, and also just to give you a little bit of foreshadowing for our next speaker, something that's going to be pertinent for all of us as project management professionals in the coming year and years to come. I would like to also reiterate the same as Sherry did earlier. Thanks to all the volunteers that helped put this together, and also kind of echo a call from, I think, not just my chapter, but all the chapters, that we are open for business and we would love to have more volunteers and more help in this year and in the years to come. So please reach out, visit our websites. We're looking for volunteers for any and all positions. I'm sure we could all use some help. So again, thanks for coming tonight. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and I'm looking forward to our next speaker. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Casey Adams, the president of the Central Indiana chapter. And this collaboration is an opportunity that really came about due to going virtual because of COVID. I'm not sure that we would have tried something like this otherwise. So actually, it's a great example of pulling opportunity out of challenge. And what we've been able to do so far is learn from each other some different ways that we each handle running events, and bringing value to all of you who choose to tune in and watch, and learning from each other these different tools and techniques here. We hope that volunteers from all of our chapters will be able to take that away from this experience, just like the programs we bring. And our next speaker here is going to have all sorts of them for everybody to benefit from. And we hope that by combining our forces, so to speak, the value we deliver is realized on a much larger scale.
And to our good friend, Rick Whitson down there in southwestern Indiana, hey, we miss you, and get well soon.